My name is Dr. Trish DeRusso. I am a pediatric gastroenterologist. I started at CHOP 33 years ago, probably this week, in my internship and residency in pediatrics. Stayed on for a fellowship program in gastroenterology. Spent some time at CHOP, but then went down to NIH and spent 3 to 4 years doing research, bench research there. And then I went to Hopkins for 10 years to focus on being a GI attending. Did clinical research with a national consortium. Spent time in the OR doing procedures. And after about 10 years, I thought, oh, I need something new and different. And so I went into pharma for 6 years, 2 different pharma companies, and learned a lot when I was in pharma. But then decided when I was being asked to come back to CHOP that I would go back to doing some clinical work. Was recruited to start a program there where we were doing research, clinical work, and education. So was really happy to return to CHOP. As you can see, we're all here from CHOP and really love that institution. But it was actually in pharma that I took a leadership program and learned a lot more about leadership through that program, which then helped me when I was asked to develop a physician leadership program at CHOP in 2014. And so a lot of what you'll hear during this week really are experiences that we've had as leaders and in leadership roles. So I'm going to talk this morning about really what is the work of leadership. And when I've talked to people in the program back at CHOP, they've been a bit surprised by what is actually the work of leadership versus management. So I want to talk a little bit about that today and go through some of that information. So this is just to say I have no disclosures. This is to say these are like the 3 areas that I want to talk about this morning. The first is that there are leadership competencies for us to be thinking about. And we take physicians and we put them in leadership roles and we don't really give them the skills and the training that would be helpful to be leaders. And so when we look at what are some of the competencies around being a leader, I want to talk just briefly about that so you're aware of those. Then I want to talk, as I mentioned, a little bit like what's management versus what is leadership. And I want your help to think about it from your perspective as well as we kind of put the 2 groupings together. And then really to understand that leaders are to promote change in an organization. And so we'll talk a little bit more about that. So did anybody here get training on leadership during medical school? No, I didn't either. Even in residency and fellowship program, I didn't get any training in leadership. Anybody here after medical school get some training during, yeah, Karen, you got some training? Yeah, it's great. When I ask people back at CHOP, there's very few hands that go up because it's just not something that we focus on. And I think it's because there's so much that we need to do during training and so much information that we need to provide that we don't give enough emphasis or talk about leadership. And so we train people to be excellent clinicians, to be researchers, to be educators, but very little time in which we're focusing on leadership skills. And so this is what I was talking about in the sense of competencies. And so these are just buckets, domains or buckets of categories to be thinking about when you're thinking about leadership skills. And communication is a huge skill for any leader. It is for anybody, whether you're a leader or not. But in an organization, it's so important to be a really good communicator. And that's one of the top things when people go through our leadership program back at CHOP that they want to work on. The second huge bucket is emotional intelligence. And I know you talked about that yesterday. And people say that is the most important skill for a leader to have. And so we'll talk briefly about that because I know you talked a good amount about that yesterday. Problem solving is another important aspect to be thinking about as a leader, because there are problems within the organization that people are looking for you to help sort out. Then down further with these buckets, technical knowledge, healthcare knowledge, and commitment to lifelong learning are all really important. And the thing to know is that leadership, really the skills for leadership go across all different types of organizations. And so just last week, I was at the Wharton School, which is our big business school in Philadelphia and really in the US. And there was a full day leadership conference talking about what to do in times of turmoil. You know, we all just went through this pandemic. And so they had people who were COOs, mainly a couple of CEOs from different companies. One company was Nissan. And you know, I sat there at first, I thought, wow, this is really interesting. This is so focused on business. And I'm in healthcare. Is this really going to be a good, you know, time for me for this day? And it was, and it's because the leadership skills and competencies, they transcend across different businesses. They're really core components. Here, healthcare knowledge, I would say, was probably one we didn't talk too much about, but it didn't really matter because there were skills and concepts that we talked about regarding leadership that was really super important. So this is a very busy slide, but it just goes to tell you, so subdomains are just more detail within that bucket. So communication, how you communicate to individuals, how you communicate to groups and teams is important. We're going to talk later on this week about negotiation, conflict resolution, giving feedback. Those are all different components of communication that as a leader you want to be skillful at. Emotional intelligence, understanding emotions, managing emotions, your own and others, is really important. And so, as I said, the emotional intelligence is a really important aspect of things. Problem solving, change management, we're going to talk about that later during the week, about promoting change. Technical knowledge, now we're not going to focus a lot on that because that's really within your own organization. So talking about finance, human resources, that can be very specific to your organization, but certainly strategy is something that we are going to be talking about because that is so important. Healthcare knowledge, and then really just a commitment to lifelong learning is an aspect of a leader. So when we think about management and leadership, there's John Kotter, who's a professor at Harvard, talks a lot about what is the difference between management and leadership. And this is where you can think about it really on a spectrum. And so you need to decide what is the work that needs to get done, who are the people that are going to help you accomplish the work, and then you want to make sure that you have those people who can do the work helping you out. There's this phrase, have the right people on the bus. It's like you want to have a team that can really help and support you. So on this slide, you can see we just have words. And what I want us to think about is what would describe leadership more so than management. Now, we certainly know that in order to be a good leader, you really kind of need to know how to manage. But if you're in a role as a leader, you want to make sure that you're doing leadership type work. So is there a word on this slide that you would say is something that a leader would do? Anybody just call out? Vision. Yeah. You guys hit them all. That's great. So vision, communicate, I heard motivate, I heard strategy, I heard, there's one more. Alignment. Communication, yes, that's another one too, and alignment. Those are really key, critical aspects of what a leader does. And all the other things are things that perhaps more of a management group would be doing. So here it just puts it into the category here. In management, you are dealing with complexity and you're dealing with people, but you're helping to organize, plan, look at targets, What are the resources that you have to accomplish the work that you want to do? What is your budget? You obviously have to have a budget to get your work done. So that's really all the work of management. Leadership, as you all just very nicely called out, is around vision, strategy, alignment, motivating, communicating, and really creating change within the organization. And so if we look at that, I think an important question for each of you to ask yourself, how much time are you spending doing the management work versus the leadership work? You really want to make sure that you're focusing as leaders on these aspects of leadership. Now, there certainly are times in which leaders, as I said, are doing some of the management work. Ideally, though, if you have people who are helping you, you're delegating some of those things to someone to help you get that work done. So any large initiative that you're working on, you really are going to hope that you've got some people that can help you out. So when I was recruited back to CHOP to develop a program, it was called the Healthy Weight Program. It was a program for children, and our vision was that we were going to improve the health of overweight and obese children who came to CHOP. And when I first went there, I thought, there's so many people here who are invested in this program. What is it that we're going to focus on? And strategy is a lot about what are you going to focus on and what are you not going to focus on? And who are the people that can sort of prevent you from getting that work done? And who are the people who can help you and promote getting that work done? So one of the first things I did was to have a retreat, to identify the key people who could help me to develop this program and key people who, they could derail it a little bit. So let's make sure we get people in the, at the retreat who can focus on this work. And so what was really helpful in this aspect was developing, we had the vision, was developing the strategy around that. Because 2 years later, someone came to us and said, why aren't we focusing on the schools and the school system for kids who are overweight and obese? Which was a very valid question. But we had decided when we all came together that what we were going to focus on and what we weren't going to focus on. And it was really helpful to have done that among key stakeholders in the organization for us to do that. And so similar to the mission of CHOP, focusing on education and research and clinical care, that was part of this program that we were developing. And so we had to have a strategy, we had to figure out how we were going to have full alignment, and then how are we going to communicate what our strategy was and what we needed people to do to help us. Motivating was really important too, because you find that once you get into this program, there was some times when people were kind of a little bit disappointed in the clinical aspect of things because it can be challenging in different things you're working on. So we're working on healthy weight, trying to get people to exercise and eat healthy. And it was sometimes a bit challenging to think about how to motivate the people who come to the program, and thus the physicians and others who were in the program. We had to keep them, really engaged and motivated to carry out the program. So this was a key learning, I think, that these are all really important aspects of developing a program. Something I learned when I was in pharma was an example in which we had the vice president of research, which was who I had reported to, was really interested in trying to figure out how are we going to determine what we're going to do for innovation. How are we going to come together to decide what's our next innovation in the work that we're doing? And so what he decided was to ask 3 people who were in the research lab to come up with these criteria. And so you can imagine we had a group of about 30 people, and these people were doing clinical research, clinical studies, basic research and all coming together to develop this new approach. And so what the vice president did was ask 3 people who were in the basic science lab to come up with what this approach would be. How are we going to have criteria to decide what our next innovation is going to be? And so these 3 people in the basic science lab got together. They did an amazing job, about 6 months, pulling together information, trying to understand, who's going to be in what role to be the decider, who's going to help offer the information of what we're going to start working on. They did that. They came to a group meeting of 30 people. They had these beautiful slides, communicated very well. We understood what their vision was, and they laid it all out. But the plan was not successful because they didn't have alignment with some of the key people, those 30 people in the organization. And so you can imagine if you took basic science researchers to figure out what the next innovation is going to be, but if you don't talk to and engage other key people, and in this circumstance it was the clinical researchers who actually do the research, they weren't engaged or asked at all. So they had no voice in the decision of what this was going to look like. So the plan was not successful, and they had to go back and then engage those people. And 9 months later, so a lot of wasted time, we were able to come up with what our innovation strategy and plan was going to be. So it was a really good learning for me to always remember that you want to talk to key people who are involved in the work that you're doing. Who are those stakeholders who can help you? Who are those stakeholders who may say there's an issue here? And that's what happened. The clinical research group said that there is an issue here. Any questions or comments so far before I go on? Okay. So change, and that's what leaders do. They promote change. It really requires having a vision. And so what I have up here in the slide is the distinction between what a manager would do and then what a leader would do in this realm. And so managers will plan and budget by plan and determine the budget by setting targets, steps that you want to achieve, and then allocating resources. And so when I was the leader of the Healthy Weight program, I had a manager who helped do that work. So I had the vision, set the direction. Certainly after we had the retreat, it was really clear to me what people wanted to focus on. Then I had someone who could help do the planning and setting the targets, while I could work on how to motivate people, how to communicate what our plan was, and make sure that we were sticking with our strategy. So here the strategy is really important, as I had mentioned earlier, that strategy often is about what are you going to focus on, what are you not going to focus on, what is the scope of the work that you're going to be doing, and actually how are you going to go about doing that. And then within the strategy you figure out what your tactics are. As I said, we'll talk more about that later on this week. It also requires motivating people. And so what you want to do is have people sort of on the bus who are really very interested in the work that you're doing. They have common goals and common interests, and they want to help promote the work as well. And so the managers really are monitoring the results and solving problems as you move through the plan, and then leaders are really inspiring and keeping people moving towards those goals under a common purpose. And then it requires communication. And so you need to communicate that frequently. You need to communicate what your vision is and what you're trying to accomplish. And so communication, as you know, can be in so many different ways. It can be written communication, it can be verbal communication, and is really important for people to understand what you are trying to achieve. And then it really requires alignment, as we talked about. And so I really like this slide because you can see that there are different colors of skin, there are different colors of shirts, and really what it brings home is this idea that people come together from different areas and different focus, different experiences, and they can really help you with determining, what is the next approach and how do you all stay aligned. Now, sometimes you'll find that people might not necessarily be in agreement with what you're doing, but what's important is that everybody has a voice. People at the table have a voice to be able to express what they think is important and can go ahead and do that. So let me just go back, and I want to see if anybody has any experience really in thinking about management and leadership and any of the sort of examples, like I had said, around having some challenges in developing a program or initiating a program with any of these aspects related to creating change or with management. So we can all sort of learn from others what experiences you may have had in trying to do something like this. So anybody have some thoughts, suggestions, comments? Thank you for those examples. Clearly people have gone through an awful lot because of the pandemic and really has challenged all of us in the work that we're trying to do. So I think I had gotten through most of the slides. This was the last one talking about alignment. This is one of my last slides, I think, leadership in practice. And so it's really important for leaders to take responsibility for things. And so responsibility for decisions that are made. Perhaps things didn't go exactly the way it was planned, but it is important for leaders to take that responsibility and not put it off and say, oh, well, my team didn't do that well, or there was some sort of issue with one particular person. You want to be leading the group, you're overseeing the group, you're supporting them, and you want to be really positive about your team. You don't want to be negative. It's important to be responsible for the communication as the leader. You really want to be communicating the information and what you are trying to achieve, or otherwise people don't know what you are trying to achieve. And one of the big things people talk about is that it's important for people in the organization to know what your vision is for what you're working on. What do you stand for? What are you trying to achieve? Otherwise, people don't know. And so it may be in your head, but if you're not communicating that verbally and in different ways, then people really don't know what the work is that you're doing and what you're trying to achieve. The other thing is focus on opportunities. How can you make things better? How can you take what's currently going on and make it even better than it is? Not problems. There's this saying, don't bring me problems, bring me solutions. People want to hear how you would focus on something, how you would address an issue. And then really think about it's we as a group. Collectively, we are trying to achieve this. So it's not like you as a single person in a huge organization. So thinking about we instead of I. And this is from Peter Drucker, who is someone who's considered, probably the father of leadership. And so just in summary, leadership competencies describe the knowledge or skills of a leader. You saw that slide that has the different domains and the subdomains to be thinking about. Management leadership are on a spectrum, and the work of leaders really is to promote change. And we'll talk more about promoting change and how to go about doing that later on this week. So I'll take any more questions or comments, and then I think we should just all sort of stand up and take a little bit of a break, and then we'll start into our next talk.